Okay, so this is not so much about challenges to building a foundry as challenges if you don't build a foundry. It's going to take the form of a brief history of the foundry idea. It started as a result of the explosion of data that was suddenly available in the biological and medical world in the 1990s because of the various genome projects which were successfully completed around that time. And these led to various other kinds of OME projects, proteomics and toxicogenomics and so forth. Hundreds of different kinds of new data were being collected and published, or not published, but collected privately in registries across the world. And every registry would use its own peculiar data model. And to a large degree also, they used their own particular terminology to describe the data that they were collecting. And the biggest problem was that where the goal was to use all of this data in order to do experiments relevant to human medicine, human health and disease, the opportunity of using data about other organisms was being blocked because the other organism communities described their data using different terms from the terms used to describe human data. And the solution to this problem, which is still the most successful ontology effort in history, was the gene ontology, which was founded in a pub in Montreal in 1998. And what the gene ontology did was it gave a standardized cross-species, cross-discipline, cross-language vocabulary for tagging or annotating gene and protein and other sequence data. So if you imagine the sequence data as being a gigantic collection of data of various sorts, something like what we have in the intelligence community world today, then the gene ontology provided a common way of navigating through all of that data, which proved immensely useful for non-experts in the different kinds of sequences. So it made sequence data and sequence-based experiments accessible to ordinary biologists and ordinary clinical scientists. Now, the problem was that the gene ontology only dealt with three kinds of data, which are illustrated here. And the people who were using it needed similarly consistent interoperable ontologies for things like anatomy and diseases and symptoms and proteins and RNA and chemistry and so forth. And so there were many ontologies being developed to complement the gene ontology, but then the same problem began to arise. These ontologies, too, were being developed by different groups in different disciplines in different countries using different data models and so forth. And so the problem was how to tame the explosion of ontologies in biology, and that is where the idea of a foundry came in. So the idea was that building ontologies which are interoperable involves the sort of work that gets carried out inside a metal foundry where temperatures are very high, people get hot, they get angry, and they work with each other to try and create safe environments. And that's what the OBO Foundry was designed to do. So OBO means Open Biomedical Ontologies. And it, too, is a success, not as successful as the gene ontology, but the gene ontology forms part of, in fact, the central part of the OBO Foundry. And it's a success. It continues to grow each year. Funding continues to grow each year. And most importantly, use cases and groups of users continue to grow each year. And the basic idea behind the OBO Foundry is that you have a hub, and then you have various ontologies which descend from this hub, which are spokes, and then various further ontologies which descend from these spokes, and so on, as far as you need to go. So it's a hub and spokes structure, and the key is that the hub should be shared by everybody. And this idea interested Jim Schoening, who is one of the leaders, or until recently was the leader of this community, the diode community, who invited me to Washington in 2010 to describe some of the reasons for the success of the OBO Foundry, which people in the DoD intelligence world at that stage wanted to replicate when dealing with data about Afghanistan and the like. So I went to Washington and the seed was planted, and I've been working with various DoD and IC agencies since then in a small way, but particularly with precursors to the dialogue. And now in the same year, IARPA organized its KDD project, and one of the winners of this project, I think there were two winners in the end, was Kubrick, which is a Buffalo-based research center with which I am loosely associated, who created a foundry for the purposes of intelligence data, machine learning, other related purposes. And they call this the Common Core Ontologies. And the Common Core Ontologies are the closest thing we have to a universal ontology of all the things that we might be interested in when dealing with the problems of combining intelligence data and other kinds of data from different sources. The Common Core Ontologies is the first example of a foundry outside biology, and that, as you can see, there are now other such examples. The Industrial Ontologies Foundry is the most recent, and it's just had its first public release. And if anyone is interested, they can contact me. The hub in all of these foundries suites is BFO, which is the basic form of ontology, which was actually created as a kind of reverse engineering of the gene ontology. It's the top level of the gene ontology, but simplified down to just 35 classes. So it's a kind of graph with 35 nodes, if you like. It turned out to be very useful as a top level ontology. It's been amended slightly over the years, but it's still basically the same as it was in 2004. And Jim Schoening initiated a project whereby BFO would be subject to validation by the International Standards Organization and the International Electrotechnical Commission. And in 2021, BFO was finally proved as the first top-level ontology which satisfies the requirements stated in Part 1 of this standard for being a top-level ontology hub for a foundry. So this is a standardization of the strategy of creating a foundry. Part 1 describes the general strategy, and Part 2 shows how BFO plays a role in that general strategy. And we now have something like 500 ontologies using BFO in this way, and that's where my comments end, Victor.